Hey everyone. Figured we'd do a real fast video where I went through the exam, talked my way through it. If at the end of the video you have any questions about the exam or about why I graded your exam the way that I did, let me know. I'm happy to go over it. So let's start with the first question. And again, you might have slightly different order, but questions should all be the same. So the order might be a little bit different. So first question, of the following two arguments, one is inductive, the other is deductive. Identify which is which, then explain, being specific, whether one is inductive and the other is deductive. So in this case, the first one, the light in my bedroom was too bright for me to sleep. I will sleep better if I can make the room brighter, or make the room darker, rather. That is an inductive argument. The conclusion is not necessary, even though it's perhaps useful advice. Let's say suddenly a bunch of construction workers start banging, right after making the room darker, right? The conclusion is not certain, but it's likely to be true. It's a good strategy to employ if you want to try to sleep better. B, on the other hand, is a deductive argument. The conclusion follows from the premises with certainty. I won't be able to sleep. I can't sleep whenever my bedroom is too bright and is currently too bright. Right? This is actually what's going to be called, we'll talk about next week, actually, a propositional argument. Right? This first premise, if it is true, and it is indeed true that it's currently too bright, the only possible conclusion we can reach is that the person will not be able to sleep. Right? Next question. Is it possible for an argument to be sound but not valid? No. Sound argument has a valid argument that has all true premises. Next. Which of the following is the correct way to characterize a good inductive argument? This is just a terminological point. We're going to call a good inductive argument a strong argument. Next question was the principle of charity. You had to determine which of two renderings of an argument was more charitable. There was no one specific answer I was looking for. I accepted people saying A was more charitable and B was more charitable, gave them full credits. What I really cared about was how you sort of justified or explained your answer. So first thing, you needed to make sure that you were actually comparing these two, not just talking about one of them, right? But actually comparing them. Second, you needed to give reasons to think that the one you were saying was more charitable were more charitable. Two components of the principle of charity: one, getting the original argument right, sort of just being accurate to what was originally intended, and then the second component is also sort of trying to make the argument as strong as you possibly can. Some things, here's just some examples of good arguments that I saw. So people say that A was the more charitable interpretation because in A, there's no sort of sense that you have the sort of something like frivolous about traveling to the moon, when they saw the first argument, that the original argument was sort of suggesting that putting people on the moon was a great achievement. And so therefore A was more charitable. That was fine. I also gave people 4 points though who argued that B was more charitable because the connection in A between putting people on the moon and poverty is pretty loose. They're just hard things, but they're hard in very different ways. But here we actually connect the hardness of traveling to the moon with poverty by connecting them to sort of resource expenditures. And I gave full points to both answers. Like I said, I cared more about how you explained your work than the answer you gave. All right. Last one before we get to the diagramming problem. So you just have to identify if the following argument is inductive or deductive. So you have $300, I have $450. We pool our resources together, we will have enough money to afford to buy a new Game Station 5, which costs $600. So this is basically just a math problem. 300 plus 450 is greater than 600, right? Notice that this argument says that you'll be able to afford, not that you'll actually be able to buy a new Game Station. If that was the case, you might think that it was inductive because maybe that's out of stock, say. But given that it's just that you'll be able to afford it, we're looking at a deductive argument. All right, let's start talking about the various diagramming problems that I've given you. So if I'll show you to begin with just the correct visual of the diagram. Okay. So for the first one, the standardization that I came up with was their songs are always so well written. The drummer of the band is talented. Therefore, the Tumbling Bands is my favorite rock band. And I said that these are independent support for the conclusion because both of them would make sense independently. They're my favorite rock band because their songs are always well written. That makes sense. They're my favorite rock band because the drummer is so talented. That also seems to make sense. Doing that, that was not exactly what I wanted to do. Sorry, give me 1 second. Go back. Yep. So doing that, now translating that diagram into this format. So we identify the conclusion. The Tumbling Boulders is my favorite rock band. We identify the two primary premises. Right? Both of these give us a reason to believe that the conclusion is true. They're independent support. They give us an independent reason. They make sense individually. And then there are no subordinate arguments. Right? And so therefore, there's no kind of support found within the subordinate argument. Second one, again, let's look at the way that I diagrammed it visually first. All right. So 4 premises. Right? I've seen people wearing green skirts. I've seen people wearing blue skirts. I've seen people wearing black skirts. I haven't seen people wearing other colors. Conclusion: green, blue, and black colored skirts are the ones in fashion this year. All right. The best way of diagramming this argument is to see all of these as linked support for the conclusion. Each of them is giving sort of one part of the conclusion. So the first premise is giving us the green part. The 2 is giving us the blue part. 3 is giving us the black part of the conclusion. And then if these are sort of the only ones in fashion this year, we're getting that from I haven't seen any other colors. That's the strongest way to do it. I saw some people have 4 be the only primary premise, with 1, 2, and 3 as linked subordinate premises supporting 4. I gave you almost full credit for that. That makes quite a bit of sense. I just don't think it quite gets at the sense of the argument as well, but it does make quite a bit of sense if you did it that way. That was a sort of reasonable rendering. So then let's go back and see what this would look like in the course of the actual multiple choice questions. So first, you identify the conclusion. Green and blue and black skirts are the ones in fashion this year. Then you'd identify all of the primary premises. The way I did it, all of them are primary premises. They're linked support. They don't really make sense independently. Each of them is giving some piece of the conclusion, so they all have to work together. And then the way that I did it, at least, there was no subordinate argument and no subordinate, and therefore no kind of no linked or independent support because there's no subordinate argument. All right, let's go to 3. 3 is the first one that's going to indeed feature a subordinate argument. So again, let's go to the diagram first. So the premises, right, we have our conclusion. There are numerous reasons to think that Spider-Man is the most influential character in the history of comics. Why his brightly colored costume became the standard against which other superhero costumes are judged. So that independently would give us a reason to believe that it's a very influential comic book. And then 2, the way the character was written opened the door to more interesting human characters in comic books. That again would give us a reason to think that it's a highly influential comic book. Why think that the way the character written opened the door to writing this? Well, because he was written as a down on his luck high school student rather than as a rich genius or an invincible alien, Superman, Batman, whatever. So 3, giving us a reason to believe that the character, indeed, the way it was written, opened up the door for more interesting support. All of these independent premises, because each of them on their own give you a reason to believe that the conclusion is true. Let's see how we would then write that in our multiple choice format. So we begin by identifying the conclusion, right? Thinking that Spider-Man is the most influential comic character in history. What are the primary premises? His costume is the standard, and the way that the character was written. All right. Those are independent. They work on their own. What are the subordinate premises in this case? In this case, we have that the fact that he was a down on his luck high school student is a subordinate premise that gives you a reason to believe that the way the character was written opened the door for more interesting and human characters. And that will have to be independent support because it's by itself. The premise doesn't have any other premises supporting it to give us our subordinate conclusion. All right, last problem, number 4. Again, let's look at the diagram for this problem. So first, we have the conclusion: homeowners associations should either be abolished or radically reformed. You could perhaps say homeowners associations are not beneficial to homeowners as a conclusion. Indeed, that will be a subordinate conclusion. But if you say that, it's going to be really unclear how this C fits in, right? How this last sentence should fit in. That seems to be pretty definitively the overarching conclusion, most controversial claim. Why think that it's true that homeowners associations should either be abolished or reformed? Well, 1, they should only exist if they're beneficial. 2, they're not beneficial. Right? That's sort of a linked argument, right? You need both parts to get to the conclusion. Why think that they're not actually beneficial? That's 3 and 4. 3 and 4 are giving 2 independent reasons to believe that homeowners associations are not beneficial. Right? Again, how are we going to translate this into our multiple choice? Identify the conclusion: homeowners associations should be either abolished or radically reformed. Why? What are the primary premises in support of this conclusion? The first 2. They are linked together, right? Each gives you sort of collectively, they give you sort of part of the conclusion. What are the subordinate premises for the subordinate argument? In this case, these are 2 reasons to believe that homeowners associations are not actually beneficial. and they are independent support. All right, so that pretty much will do it for this quick little video. If you see a +1 or a +0.5 in the comments in your answers, that was an instance of me giving you partial credit. The way I gave partial credit for these multiple choice problems is if you made a mistake, but what you did subsequent to that mistake makes sense, I gave you partial credit for what you did sort of subsequently. So a 0.5 means that it sort of made sense. A +1 means that it indeed does make sense given the original mistake. So look over your exams. You should be able to see the problems and see all my comments. And then, yeah, I'll see you all next week. We can talk about any questions anyone has on the exam then. All right, talk to you later. Bye.